Welcome to Learn English Through History. Take a slow breath, relax your shoulders, and let the noise of the day fade away. Today, we travel back more than 200 years in time to follow one of the most remarkable life stories in human history. Learning English is a journey. It is like opening an old wooden door to a new world. As you listen today, you do not need to worry about grammar rules or difficult tests. Just let the words flow naturally into your ears. If you hear a word you do not know, stay relaxed. Its meaning will become clear as our story moves forward. Our story begins in Europe at the end of the 18th century. In those days, the world looked completely different. There were no cars on the streets, no airplanes in the sky, and no electric lights in the houses. When night fell over the towns and villages, the darkness was deep and quiet. People lit small wax candles or oil lamps to read and talk. Letters traveled slowly across muddy roads on horse-drawn carriages, and wooden ships crossed the oceans using only the power of the wind. Life back then was strict and predictable. Kings and queens held supreme power over their lands. If you were born into a poor farming family, you worked in the fields until your hands grew rough and tired, rarely leaving the village of your birth. If you were born into a wealthy noble family, you enjoyed grand palaces, fine silk clothes, and great influence. Society was divided into rigid layers. Most people believed that your family name decided your destiny forever. Destiny is the future that someone is expected to have. Then, Europe began to shake. Fresh ideas about freedom and equality spread from city to city. Soon, hope and anger broke out into a revolution. A revolution is a sudden and complete change in the government and political system of a country. Old crowns fell to the ground. Ancient traditions began to break. In this time of great change, the door of opportunity opened just a little bit for people with real talent and courage. Out of that storm walked one young man. He was not a prince. He did not come from a famous family in Paris. He grew up on a small island surrounded by rocky hills and the blue Mediterranean Sea. When he first arrived in France, other students laughed at his strange accent and his quiet manners. Yet this boy carried something powerful inside his chest. He carried immense ambition. Ambition means a strong desire and determination to achieve greatness. Over his lifetime, he would command massive armies across snow, sand, and rivers. He would direct more than 60 major battles. He would build roads, establish banks, and write laws that many countries still use today. His name would make foreign monarchs tremble and inspire millions of soldiers. How did an outsider from a lonely island rise so high? What choices did he make, and what price did he pay for his power? To understand this journey, we must look at the moment his dream reached its highest peak. Step into the cold Paris air of 1804. It is the second day of December, 1804, inside a grand cathedral in Paris. A cathedral is a very large and important church. Outside, the winter air is crisp and freezing, but inside the ancient stone building, the atmosphere is heavy with anticipation. Anticipation is a feeling of excitement and curiosity about what will happen next. Thousands of golden candles flicker against the tall stone arches. Soft white smoke from burning incense rises toward the high ceiling, and the scent of sweet oils and beeswax fills the vast room. Rich tapestries hang from the walls. Nobles, generals, diplomats, and royal guests fill every bench. They wear bright silk jackets, dark coats decorated with shining metals, and velvet dresses that sweep across the stone floor. In the center of the hall sits an elderly man on a high velvet chair. He wears white robes and a calm expression. This is Pope Pius VII, the leader of the Catholic Church. For hundreds of years across Europe, kings knelt before the pope or a bishop to receive their crowns. People believed royal power was given directly by the church. Today, the old rules do not apply. The choir stops singing. A heavy silence falls over the crowd. Every eye in the cathedral turns toward one man standing in the center of the hall. He is 35 years old. He stands about 5 feet 6 inches tall, but his presence commands the entire room. He wears a heavy cloak of purple velvet, lined with white fur and embroidered with golden bees. His dark hair is neatly cut, and his eyes look forward with steady focus. He does not bow down. He does not kneel before the Pope. Slowly, the man steps toward the altar. He reaches his hands toward the golden crown resting on a red cushion. The guests hold their breath in shock. Will he bow his head for a blessing? No. With steady hands, he lifts the heavy crown into the air. He raises it above his own head and places it firmly upon his hair. In that single, bold movement, he sends a clear message to France and the entire continent. He does not owe his power to an ancient royal family. He does not owe his power to the church. He earned it through his own mind, his own courage, and his own victories. This grand event is a coronation. A coronation is an official ceremony where a ruler receives a crown. Next, the new ruler turns to his wife Josephine. She kneels gracefully before him. Gently, he places a smaller golden crown upon her head. With this action, he officially becomes the Emperor of the French. An emperor is a supreme ruler who controls a large empire of many lands and millions of people. The cathedral erupts with loud cheers. Trumpets blare, and giant iron bells ring out across the city of Paris. The sound travels across the river and over the rooftops. Across Europe, ancient kings and queens hear the news and tremble with fear. Who was this bold outsider who had just taken the crown of France? His name is Napoleon Bonaparte. In that cold December of 1804, the name of Napoleon Bonaparte echoed through every royal palace, grand city, and quiet village in Europe. To his devoted soldiers, he was an invincible commander, the fearless general who shared dry bread and muddy roads with them in Italy and Egypt. To the royal families of Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, he was a dangerous rebel who threatened the traditional rule of monarchs. A monarch is a king or queen who rules a country by royal birth. But to ordinary citizens in France, he was a symbol of order, glory, and incredible human achievement. France had just lived through more than 10 years of violent revolution and bloody unrest. The old king had been executed, and the streets of Paris had known terrible fear and uncertainty. Neighbors had turned against neighbors, and foreign armies had attacked France from every side. Many people believed the nation would fall apart completely and lose its place in the world. Yet in the middle of all that chaos, this young officer stepped forward. He did not come from an ancient line of wealthy French nobility. He did not inherit gold, palaces, or vast country estates. An estate is a very large area of land and property owned by one family. In fact, he was not even born on the mainland of France. Later in history, enemy newspapers and British cartoons made fun of him. They drew pictures showing him as a tiny, angry man. But in real life, Napoleon was not short for his era. Official records and medical measurements confirm that he stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall. In the late 18th century, that was slightly taller than the average Frenchman. He had a sharp, magnetic gaze with pale gray eyes that seemed to look right through a person. He moved with incredible energy and often slept only 4 or 5 hours each night. When he entered a room, his presence brought absolute authority. Authority means the recognized power and right to make decisions and give orders. How did an outsider climb so fast and reach so high? How did a boy who spoke broken French with a thick island accent rise to sit on the grandest throne in Europe? In world history, millions of soldiers have fought in thousands of wars, yet very few military leaders ever matched his record. Napoleon commanded his troops in more than 60 major battles. He won over 53 of them, achieving a success rate of more than 85%. He was a master of speed, surprise, mathematics, and tactical genius. Tactical means carefully planned military actions designed to win a specific battle. Beyond the battlefield, he rebuilt French roads, created a stable national banking system, and introduced the famous Napoleonic Code. This legal code established the basic rule that all men are equal under the law, and that people should advance in society based on talent rather than family background. This principle is known as meritocracy. A meritocracy is a social system where people gain power and success through their personal abilities and hard work. The story of this extraordinary rise does not begin with golden crowns, cheering crowds, or grand palaces in Paris. It begins in a modest stone house on a sun-drenched island far out in the Mediterranean Sea. Only 25 years before he crowned himself emperor, Napoleon was simply a skinny boy living on a rugged island. He had no grand title. He had no family fortune. He did not even speak proper French. Yet in his quiet eyes, there was already an intense spark of curiosity and iron will. Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, in the coastal town of Ajaccio, on the island of Corsica. Corsica is a wild, mountainous island, surrounded by the warm waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The air in Ajaccio smelled of sea salt, olive trees, and wild mountain herbs. For centuries, Corsica belonged to the Italian Republic of Genoa. But in 1768, just 1 year before Napoleon was born, France bought the island. The local people were proud and rebellious. They loved their freedom and spoke their own Corsican dialect, which sounded very close to Italian. Napoleon's father was Carlo Bonaparte, an educated lawyer who worked hard to secure a future for his family. His mother was Letizia Ramolino, a remarkably strong and disciplined woman. She was only 19 years old when Napoleon was born, but she managed the busy household with firm rules and deep affection. Napoleon was the second of 8 surviving children. Letizia taught her children never to complain, to endure cold and hunger without tears, and to protect family honor above all things. Throughout his life, Napoleon always admired his mother's steady courage. The Buonaparte family belonged to the minor nobility of the island. Minor nobility meant they held an official aristocratic title and owned a little land, but they possessed very little cash. They lived simply in a 4-story stone house with plain wooden furniture. While other children played noisy games in the dusty streets of Ajaccio, young Napoleon often climbed into an attic room to read. He read thick books about ancient history, famous generals, and mathematics. He read about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and the brave warriors of ancient Greece. He filled small notebooks with calculations and tactical sketches. As a child, Napoleon was quick to defend his dignity. When older boys teased him, he never ran away in fear. He fought back with fierce determination. But his small island could not hold his growing ambition. His father knew that real opportunities lay far across the sea. If Napoleon wanted to become a military officer, he needed a proper French education. In December 1778, at 9 years old, Napoleon said goodbye to his mother and his sunny home. He boarded a small wooden ship and sailed north toward mainland France. Mainland means the primary landmass of a country, separate from its offshore islands. The voyage across the gray winter sea was cold and rough. Napoleon stepped ashore into a completely foreign world. He did not speak standard French, and he deeply missed the warm Mediterranean sun. In the spring of 1779, after learning basic French at a religious school in Autun, Napoleon entered the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château. The school was located in a quiet, chilly town in northeastern France. Behind its tall gray walls, strict monks trained young boys for the royal army. When Napoleon walked through the heavy iron gates with his worn wooden trunk, he knew immediately that he was an outsider. The boys at Brienne came from the wealthiest noble families in France. They wore fine coats and spoke with polished Parisian accents. Napoleon, on the other hand, had very little money. His uniform was simple, and his French was clumsy and thick with an Italian accent. The other students laughed at the way he talked. They teased him about his strange name and his modest background. A modest background means a person comes from a family with little wealth or social influence. Napoleon felt lonely and bitter, but he refused to let their cruel words break his spirit. Instead of crying, he withdrew into the school library. He spent hours reading by candlelight, while other boys played games outside. He studied geography, ancient history, and science. Most of all, he loved mathematics. Numbers were clean, logical, and fair. In mathematics, it did not matter if you were a rich duke or a poor islander. The answer was either right or wrong. His sharp mind and natural authority soon showed on the playground. During one particularly cold winter, deep snow covered the school grounds. Napoleon suggested a game. He divided the students into 2 teams and designed a massive snow fortress with deep trenches and defensive walls. He directed his team like a real general, giving calm orders and outsmarting the enemy. For the first time, the boys who had mocked him followed his commands without hesitation. In 1784, after 5 years of hard study, Napoleon earned a place at the prestigious Royal Military School in Paris, known as the École Militaire. This was the most elite military academy in the entire kingdom. Here, he chose to specialize in artillery. Artillery refers to large, heavy guns and cannons used in warfare. Artillery required advanced mathematics, precise geometry, and careful calculation of angles and distances. Napoleon mastered these technical skills with incredible speed. Around this time, tragedy struck his family. His father, Carlo, died of illness, leaving the family with heavy debts. Napoleon felt the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. He needed to finish his studies and start earning a salary to help his mother and younger siblings. He completed the rigorous 2-year artillery course in just one single year. In September 1785, at the age of 16, Napoleon passed his final exams and received his commission as a second lieutenant in the French Royal Artillery. At 16 years old, he was now an officer of the king. He received a blue uniform, a heavy officer's sword, and a modest monthly wage. He was stationed in quiet garrison towns in southern France. A garrison town is a town where military troops are permanently stationed to train and guard the area. Life was quiet, but Napoleon did not waste his spare hours. He lived on one meal a day to save money, sending every spare coin back home to Corsica. He read philosophy, studied battlefield tactics, and filled notebooks with ideas about government and power. France seemed peaceful on the surface, but beneath the quiet streets, anger against the king was growing. Great storms were coming, and young Lieutenant Bonaparte was preparing for them. In 1789, a massive historic event shook the entire nation of France. This event was the French Revolution. A revolution is a complete and sudden change in the government and society of a country. Ordinary French citizens, tired of high taxes, hunger, and unfair treatment, rose up against the absolute rule of the king. The old social system collapsed almost overnight. In the past, only rich aristocrats could become generals and government leaders. Now, the new revolutionary government needed leaders who were skilled, brave, and loyal, regardless of their family background. This was the beginning of meritocracy. Meritocracy is a system where people are chosen and rewarded based on their actual abilities and hard work, rather than their wealth or birth. For young Napoleon, this political storm was a door of opportunity. In 1793, the young French Republic faced severe danger. Enemy armies attacked France from every border. In the south, the important naval port city of Toulon rebelled against the revolutionary government. Royalist rebels invited British and Spanish warships into the harbor. British soldiers occupied the city's strong stone forts. The loss of Toulon was a terrible disaster for France. If the British held Toulon, they could easily invade southern France and crush the revolution. The French army marched to recapture the city, but their artillery commander was wounded in early fighting. Through the help of Corsican political connections, 24-year-old Captain Napoleon Bonaparte was assigned to take command of the artillery at Toulon. When he arrived, the French camp was disorganized and short of supplies. The commanders did not understand how to attack the fortified harbor. Napoleon immediately went to work. He walked across the rugged hills in the mud and rain, carefully studying the terrain. Terrain means the physical features and landscape of a piece of land. He realized that charging the city walls directly was a foolish mistake. Instead, he identified a key hill called Fort l'Aiguillette that overlooked the entire inner harbor. If French cannons could take this hill, they could fire directly onto the British fleet below. The British ships would be forced to sail away, leaving the enemy soldiers on land with no escape route. Napoleon built new artillery batteries under heavy enemy fire. An artillery battery is a group of heavy cannons organized to fire together. He stood alongside his men in the smoke and mud, personally aiming the guns. During one fierce assault, an enemy soldier bayoneted him in the thigh, but Napoleon kept shouting orders. His tactical plan worked perfectly. On December 18, 1793, French troops captured the hill and placed heavy guns on top. Facing constant cannon fire from above, the British fleet panicked, set fire to the remaining French ships, and fled out to sea. Toulon surrendered the following morning. The victory made Napoleon a national hero overnight. Government leaders in Paris received reports about the brilliant young officer who had saved the southern coast. Just 3 days before Christmas in 1793, Napoleon received a stunning reward for his courage and intelligence. At only 24 years old, he was officially promoted to the rank of brigadier general. A boy from a poor island had suddenly become one of the youngest generals in the entire French army. Yet the political waters in Paris remained treacherous, and a new crisis was already waiting for him. The French Revolution remained violent and unpredictable. In 1794, the radical leaders fell from power, and Napoleon briefly lost his military command. For several difficult months in Paris, he lived with very little money and no clear future. He walked along the cold stone streets of the city, wondering if his military career was already finished before it had truly begun. Another sudden crisis soon changed his life forever. In October 1795, an angry crowd of royalist rebels marched through Paris to overthrow the revolutionary government. A royalist is a person who supports the return of a king or queen. The government leaders were terrified. They desperately needed a fearless commander to defend the city. They called young Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon acted without hesitation. He positioned heavy cannons along the narrow streets surrounding the government palace. When the armed crowd charged, he ordered his gunners to fire grapeshot directly into the attackers. Grapeshot is a cluster of small iron balls fired together from a cannon like a giant shotgun blast. The rebellion was crushed in less than 2 hours. The government was saved, and Napoleon became the most famous officer in the capital. The grateful leaders rewarded Napoleon by giving him command of the French army of Italy. Before leaving Paris in the spring of 1796, he married a charming and elegant woman named Josephine de Beauharnais. When Napoleon arrived at the Italian front, he found a starving, poorly clothed army of 37,000 men. The soldiers were discouraged and had not received their pay for months. Napoleon spoke to them with great energy. He promised them honor, glory, and rich lands across the mountains. Napoleon proved his brilliance on the battlefields of northern Italy. A military campaign is a series of connected battles and movements planned to achieve a specific goal. Traditional 18th century generals moved slowly and fought formal battles in open fields during daylight. Napoleon changed everything. He marched his soldiers through deep mud and cold rain at night. He moved with incredible speed, striking separate enemy units before they could join together. Within 1 year, he won dozens of battles against larger Austrian armies. He forced the Austrian Empire to sign a peace treaty and sent wagons filled with gold and famous artwork back to Paris. By 1798, Napoleon was a national hero, but his ambition was growing even larger. He launched an expedition to invade Egypt and disrupt British trade routes to Asia. Napoleon did not sail to Egypt with soldiers alone. He brought along a special team of 167 scientists, engineers, and scholars. A scholar is a person who has studied a subject for many years and possesses deep knowledge. These scholars mapped the ancient ruins, studied the pyramids, and drew detailed pictures of desert plants and animals. In July 1799, French soldiers digging near the port city of Rashid uncovered a dark, heavy slab of stone with 3 different types of writing carved upon it. This object became famous around the world as the Rosetta Stone. It later allowed scientists to read and understand ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs for the first time in modern history. While Napoleon fought in the desert sands, disturbing news arrived from Europe. A powerful coalition of enemy nations was invading French territory, and the government in Paris was falling apart. Napoleon knew that France was in danger. He quietly boarded a ship, sailed past British warships in the Mediterranean, and returned to France. His ultimate rise to total power was about to begin. When Napoleon arrived back in France in October 1799, the crowds welcomed him with great excitement. The French people were tired of high taxes, bad harvests, and endless political corruption. They wanted a strong and capable leader to restore order, and they saw that leader in the young general from Corsica. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon and his political allies made their move. They carried out a sudden political takeover known as a coup d'état. A coup d'état is a sudden and decisive overthrow of an existing government, often led by military officers. Napoleon dissolved the old unpopular assembly and established a new system of leadership. At just 30 years old, he became the first consul and took direct control of the French nation. Napoleon was not only a battlefield commander, he was also an energetic administrator who worked up to 16 hours a day. On January 18, 1800, he founded the Bank of France to stabilize the nation's currency and rebuild the damaged economy. In July 1801, he signed a special agreement called the Concordat with Pope Pius VII. This agreement brought peace between the French government and the Catholic Church after a decade of religious conflict. In May 1802, Napoleon established the Legion of Honor. This was a prestigious medal awarded to soldiers, scientists, and artists for outstanding service to the nation. Napoleon believed strongly in meritocracy. Meritocracy is a social system where people earn power and success based on their personal talent and hard work, rather than their wealthy family background. For the first time, an ordinary soldier from a poor village could rise to the rank of general through courage and skill alone. In early 1804, Napoleon introduced his most lasting domestic achievement, the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code was a single, unified system of civil laws for the entire nation. It declared that all citizens were equal before the law, protected private property, and guaranteed religious tolerance. Many modern nations in Europe and the Americas still base their legal systems on these foundational ideas. On December 2, 1804, thousands of guests gathered inside the cold stone walls of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris for his coronation. A coronation is a formal religious ceremony in which a new monarch is officially crowned. Napoleon wore a heavy purple velvet robe embroidered with golden bees. In a famous moment of absolute authority, he lifted the golden crown with his own hands and placed it upon his head before crowning his wife Josephine. The boy from Corsica was now the Emperor of the French. European monarchs watched his growing strength with deep worry. Over his entire military career, Napoleon commanded more than 60 major battles and won more than 85% of them. At the Battle of Austerlitz in December 1805, he used clever tactical traps to defeat a combined Austrian and Russian army. By 1807, after signing the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon controlled an empire of more than 70 million people across Western and Central Europe. He stood at the absolute summit of human power, but his enormous ambition was about to face its ultimate test. In 1812, Napoleon made his greatest mistake. He led a massive army of more than 685,000 soldiers into Russia. The Russian army refused to fight open battles, burning their own towns and food supplies as they retreated deeper into the vast countryside. When the brutal winter arrived, temperatures plummeted far below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. With little food and frozen roads, the French army suffered terribly. By the time Napoleon retreated across the icy Berezina River, fewer than 100,000 soldiers remained. Seeing his weakness, a powerful coalition of European nations united against him. In 1814, Allied armies marched into Paris, and Napoleon was forced to abdicate. To abdicate means to formally give up the throne and surrender your royal power. He was sent into exile on the small Mediterranean island of Elba. An exile is a forced departure from one's home country. Yet, the emperor was not finished. After 9 months and 21 days on Elba, he escaped on a small ship, landed on the southern coast of France, and marched back to Paris. French soldiers sent to arrest him laid down their weapons and joined him instead. For a brief period known as the 100 Days, Napoleon ruled France once again. But his final stand came on June 18, 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo in modern-day Belgium. Facing British and Prussian armies, Napoleon suffered his final defeat. This time, the British took no chances. They sent Napoleon into a second exile on St. Helena, a lonely volcanic island far away in the South Atlantic Ocean. For 6 long years, he lived under constant British guard. He spent his quiet days reading, dictating his memoirs, and walking in the damp ocean air. British propaganda cartoons often mocked him as a tiny, angry man, yet historical records and his final autopsy showed he stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall. In truth, he was slightly taller than the average Frenchman of his era. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died at the age of 51. In his final days on that remote island, Napoleon often thought back to his earliest years. He remembered arriving as a poor, lonely boy at the military academy of Brienne. Back then, wealthy aristocratic students had laughed at his thin coat and his heavy Corsican accent. An aristocrat is a person born into the highest and richest social class. Napoleon never let their cruel words stop him. Instead, he worked late into the night, studying mathematics, history, and military strategy. Through quiet discipline and steady self-belief, he rose from that isolated classroom to conquer continents and reshape the modern world. Learning English is very much like that journey. At first, you might feel like an outsider, unsure of your accent or hesitant with difficult words. But every new sentence you practice is a real step forward. With daily discipline and patient practice, you can build true confidence. Which part of Napoleon's life surprised you the most? Write your answer in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to Learn English Through History for more calm listening stories every week, and keep taking one small step forward each day.